For being a journalist, first of all.
It's all right. I'm in the NUJ as well as Unison. Okay, so look after you, right?
Obviously, there's a phenomenal amount of interest in you coming here, Jeremy, and that's reflected in the questions you've got. It's questions from members of the Labour Party and from without as well. It's not just members of the Jeremy Corbyn Appreciation Society.
It doesn't exist.
So I'll crack straight on. The first question is from Paul Kelly. He's no relation, I hasten to add. It says, my question for Jeremy is, how does he intend to unite the party in the event of the leadership victory? And how will you be able to ensure that Labour MPs won't be fired whip, as he has done in the past, when it comes to key votes?
If I'm elected as the leader of the party in September, there is going to be a very important process then of policy making and policy changes, I hope, in the party. The leader should not be able to dictate policy, and I certainly wouldn't want to do that. What I'm suggesting straight away is that we set up a commission to deal with constitutional issues, so we look at the powers of government in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. We look at English regions, we look at the funding of them, we look at the voting system, we look at the way in which the royal prerogative is held by the Prime Minister, which is unaccountable, and we look at also the need to alter the House of Lords into a democratically elected, accountable chamber of Parliament. Now, I understand the point that there are some people in the Parliamentary Labour Party who don't welcome the process that's going on here, but I also noticed that there are a very large number of Labour members of Parliament that aren't saying very much at all at the present time, and I'm sure that many of those are prepared to recognise that whoever is elected the leader in September will have a huge democratic mandate to bring about those kind of changes in the Parliamentary Labour Party. Does it mean that there will be people who will disagree with me on nuclear weapons? Yes, I'm sure there are. I know there are. Does it mean there are some who think that the economic strategy we've laid out, which is one about challenging austerity rather than accepting it, is not the one they would choose to follow? I'm sure that is the case. But the Labour Party has got to be big enough to include people, but it's also got to be determined enough to understand that if we don't learn the lessons of lack of an alternative in the 2015 election, then the votes aren't going to come running back to Labour. They're going to continue going off elsewhere or abstaining because they want us to offer something radical and different that's relevant to the needs of ordinary people within our society. Does it mean that there will be times when there's going to be disagreement? I'm absolutely sure there would be. I've been involved in plenty of disagreements myself in my life in the British Parliament. But I think that the 600,000 members and supporters of the party are in for the long haul. They're in to ensure that we do challenge what's going on and we do approach the forthcoming general election some years away with a real degree of resolution and popular support for the stuff we're saying. I hold my hand out to all to recognise the democracy of this process and recognise the hopes that have been unleashed by this process. And it's up to the Labour Party to embrace and welcome those hopes and take them forward.
Just out of interest, how do you democratise the House of Lords?
Well, I think you don't democratise the House of Lords because it's a completely appointed chamber at the present time. I think you abolish the House of Lords. With specific powers so you don't end up with a permanent constitutional logjam. It would be almost a written constitution, but keep that quiet because that would be a big change. Some people might like it, but please keep it to yourselves.
Going back to the previous point, Maureen Madden of Usdaw, she submitted a question saying, as a Labour councillor, and as someone who's been waiting for a left lead of the party for the past 35 years, I would welcome Jeremy's thoughts on how he's going to rebuild the Parliamentary Labour Party and stop the bloodletting, which will do the party no good and possibly stop his future plans. And good luck, she adds again.
Well, I thank her for her good wishes. Most welcome. And the Parliamentary Labour Party is a very important part of the party. Those of us that are members of Parliament have got there because a lot of people worked very hard to put us there, and communities voted for us to go there. But with the best and most respectful will in the world, I say to all my colleagues in Parliament, the Parliamentary Labour Party isn't the only part of the Labour Party. It should be the contribution to the entire movement. I hold my hand out. Let's work together on the principles we put forward, on economy, on welfare, on foreign policy, on environment, on peace, on justice, on equality. Let's oppose what the Tories are doing and not think that somehow or other we can ape the Tories and get more support as a result. Politics doesn't work like that.
Next question is from Chris Clark. Again, he has best wishes for Jeremy.
Thanks all his best wishes.
There's always a hairy butt at the end of it. He says, his first question what does Jeremy believe it takes to be a successful leader of the opposition who can win a general election within 5 years, whilst espousing policies that, though striking a chord with many ordinary men and women, are viewed by political commentators as utopian lost causes at best, and by opponents as relics of the post-World War II era?
Great imagination there. What is backward-looking about a more egalitarian society? What is backward-looking about challenging the levels of unaccountable powers of global corporations? What is backward-looking about all of that? And when people say, well, there's only a minority support these opinions, ask people out there. On railway public ownership, for example, majority. Ask people out there what they think about nuclear weapons. Ask people out there what they think about more sustainable environmental policy. Ask people out there what they think about not allowing a housing market to let rip, which causes such pain and misery for so many. Instead, regulate the private rented sector and invest in council housing. All that is popular stuff that people fully understand. I think there is a huge resonance out there of people who are prepared to come along with us and support and vote for those kind of policies. But it doesn't all happen in the 3 or 4 fevered weeks of an election campaign. It happens over a much longer period. How you build community campaigns, how you build opposition to what this government is doing, how you build support for the kind of society that I think all of us want to live in. And I think there is a huge support for that there. The role of party leaders is an important one, but don't overstate it. The best role of a leader is to encourage others to do lots more as well and bring people along with them. And that is really how I see this process being taken forward.
Also, as leader of the opposition, you might find yourself in a position having to support policies which you might not agree with. How difficult would that be for you?
Well, we'll have to come to a decision-making within the party on fundamental policies, and we have to have a really open democratic process. And obviously, at the end of the democratic process, you then get to a decision, which hopefully is something we can agree on, and that's what I'll be working for. Is life going to be easy? No. Is life going to be complicated? Yeah, it probably is. But is life going to be exciting? Oh yes, it's certainly going to be that. So let's bring some excitement into it.
Going to specific policy, getting away from the generalities. One from Aaron Neve, who says, what policies will you put in place for low-income earners like myself who will never be able to afford to buy their own home and are struggling with rising private rental costs?
Yeah, very good question. At the moment, the level of council housing stock has progressively fallen over the past 30 years, 40 years, during the period of right to buy and the lack of council house building. Housing associations have gone up a bit. Private rented sector has gone up enormously. I think we do a number of things. One is a proper regulation of the private rented sector, not just the rent levels, but also the conditions, the terms of tenancy, the length of tenancy, the protection against eviction, preemptive eviction that sometimes takes place. Those things are very, very important. Secondly, provision of council places with lifetime tenancies, not short-term tenancies, and certainly not what the government is now proposing, that your rent level changes according to your income. Surely income should be taxed as a basis of income tax rather than some complicated manoeuvre of changing rent levels around the place as people may get a pay rise or not. And thirdly, supporting people not to buy their own places from the council on huge discounts, but instead support them with first-time buyers with mortgages, if that's what is helpful to them to get somewhere to live on their own. But above all, the principle has to be access of housing to all and security of tenure. In my constituency, a third of the community live in the private rented sector. A very, very small number, probably less than a few hundred, live in protected tenancies from the 1970s rent legislation. The rest are all on 6-month assured short-hold tenancies. It means that in the ward where I live, in my constituency, there's a population turnover of almost 30% a year. That is destabilising to any community and very unfair on children and others that live there. And so what we're suggesting is stability in the private rented sector, council housing, and access to mortgages for first-time buyers on low income. But we're also suggesting we look at poverty level incomes in Britain, which is why I made the point about minimum wage and what it ought to be, but also about the levels of in-work benefits that are available, particularly for large families. There's a lot of issues we can do to eliminate poverty within our society, but essentially it has to be one about what is real security. Real security is knowing you've got a roof over your head, knowing your children are not going to starve, knowing you've got health care, knowing nobody's going to completely abandon you. That's what real security is about.
Question from L. Sinclair. How does Mr. Corbyn realistically tackle the challenges for health and social care, where there are finite resources and growing complex needs, alongside retaining, growing and supporting health and social care professionals?
Adult social care is an obviously absolutely huge issue, and at the moment we have a combination of National Health Service support, local authority support, some degree of private paid support by people who've got enough money to do that, or they lose their homes if they're owner-occupiers in order to pay for people with adult social care. But because of the underfunding of local government, there's increasing evidence of people, elderly people who need a lot of care, unable to leave acute wards in hospitals because they cannot get any move-on accommodation provided by local government. It's an absolutely desperate crisis. If we wish to have the kind of decency in society we want, we've got to be prepared to pay for it, and there has to be a joint funding between local government and the NHS of adult social care, and there has to be proper funding of local government to achieve it. And that is the problem with the austerity budget, which eats into the funding of local government, the massive cuts that are taking place in local government funding, and that, of course, then plays out into adult social care. Is it expensive? Yeah, it is expensive. But the alternative is what? The alternative is to ignore people, to let people die, to just all that. No, I think we have to be, as a society, prepared to recognise the need for it and to be prepared to pay for it. That surely is what a collective society is about.
Unlike your rival candidates, you voted against essentially £12 billion cuts. What would you do? Increase spending on social care? What's your policy on that?
On social care, there has to be an increase in spending because the needs are so obvious and so huge that are there. There also has to be a looking very carefully at the welfare budget. I make the point there that increasingly great deal of the welfare budget actually goes on housing benefit and subsidising very high rents, just in the same way that very low wages are subsidised by in-work benefits. So it's raising wages and lowering rents actually has a beneficial effect, or puts the cost instead partly onto employers to pay higher wages, and it also possibly reduces the profits of some people in the private rented sector. And so I do think that we have to just be prepared to have some quite significant changes. But if we do it on the principle of the kind of society and world we want to live in, then I think that's the right thing to do. Is it easy? No, of course it isn't easy. But the alternative is what? Ignore people, the misery, the degradation of their lives that goes on. So I think we have to make those bold changes.
Again, staying the social care theme, Jeremy's a child protection social worker in this region. He says, I see the hardship that austerity in the current government ideology has on vulnerable families, with a lack of early state intervention and the impact of drug abuse, mental health issues and domestic violence resulting in high levels of child abuse. What do you propose we can do in terms of social care in order to most effectively protect vulnerable children and ensure that less people are entering the care system?
Supportive intervention at an early stage is very important. Protecting children is obviously absolutely crucial, and it's a very difficult area where teachers and social workers and community workers all have to come together to try and support people that are going through very great difficulties and give them the necessary support that they need. It's not easy, and they may often have to make quite tough decisions, but the alternative of children being left in a vulnerable situation, or usually women in a family or relationship becoming grotesquely abused and ignored, their plight being ignored, or indeed older people suffering abuse as well. So there has to be a preparedness by the community as a whole to intervene to protect people who are very vulnerable, protect children who are very vulnerable. But the question is quite right, that the impact of austerity cuts means that social workers' caseload is absolutely enormous, often have great difficulty in coping, as are many other services. And so that is one of the impacts of austerity. But it's also a question of the levels of poverty brought about by long-term unemployment and brought about by poor quality housing. And so you don't change everything overnight, but if you move in the direction of trying to provide a more cohesive and coherent society, then you ultimately provide a lot more protection for other people. But there are issues, particularly surrounding children and domestic violence, of the necessity of the police being able to intervene where necessary, and proper support for rape crisis centres and women's centres, so there is a place of refuge to go to when awful things actually happen. And so we've got more by the other side, but we've got quite generous. We have put some ideas together on this in the document we put out around policies for women.
Okay. On to a different topic, but very important all the same. From Lynn Swan, he's a Sunderland student, he's been a student since 2012, struggling with the burden of tuition fees, interested to hear what you believe ought to be done regarding tuition fees in order, in Liam's words, to create a more educationally motivated youth in Britain.
Well done, great question. Education to me is something that is education for the value of learning as well as for the value of qualifications. And how we bring up our children is very important. So I didn't say much about this in my contribution, but we have had some discussions about it, about access for all children to preschool social play activities, not necessarily teaching children under school age, but giving them the opportunity to interact and socialise is something that I think is very important. Moving through the school education year, we are hoping to set up a proper commission on education and look at the issues surrounding it and empower local education authorities to ensure there is a family of schools rather than a series of competing free schools and academies. So we build up that kind of sense of educational community. I want academies and free schools brought back within the local education. On the post-school and adult issues, my generation had free access to universities. This budget has taken away the last little bit of that, which was some students from particularly poor families could get a maintenance grant and could get a payment of their tuition fees. Tuition fees have now reached the astronomical figure of 9,000. The government and others want to lift the cap altogether, and I don't doubt there's Russell Group universities that would be quite able to get away with charging huge fees, 25, 30,000 pounds. There's enough people around the world to do it. So there's a big choice for us here. Do we want to go down the road of the American system, which is essentially very, very high tuition fees, and they keep telling us there's lots of scholarships available, so it's all very fair and very equal? Well, yes, Bill Clinton got a scholarship and went to an Ivy League university and went on to become president of the USA. Well done, Bill Clinton. There are hundreds of thousands of other poor Americans that didn't get a scholarship, didn't get to go to an Ivy League university, and missed out on that opportunity. Cannot we look at other European countries, the Scandinavian countries in particular, that value their university education, don't charge fees, and give support for students to go there? So my suggestion, our suggestion that we put forward, is that by raising corporation tax by 0.5% instead of lowering it by 2%, we'd be able to pay for student fees and not leave students leaving university with these massive debts. It seems to me but it's also about ensuring that every young person gets an opportunity for vocational qualifications, apprenticeships. But I do think that some of them need to be slightly better regulated to ensure they don't become a source of cheap labour. The last point I make on education, because I get the feeling the noises and signs around that we're about to finish actually, is the one about adult education. There is something very important in giving people access to learning, whether it's for a job, for a qualification, to career development, or simply because they want to broaden their mind and broaden their horizons. It's not that expensive to fund adult education, but the benefits of it are so absolutely huge that I think we need to have a more coherent approach. So we've suggested a national education service that does ensure there is sufficient funding available for those kind of programmes that are then, of course, run through the local education authorities and local services. And so let's change the attitude and approach to education. If somebody's well qualified, we all benefit. If somebody learns, becomes a writer, becomes a painter, becomes a poet, somebody that becomes a scientist, becomes all kinds of things, we actually all benefit from that. And so I would also include in that support for the creative industry and our industry.
One last brief question, I think very relevant to tonight. Andy Burnham said, I don't even know if Jeremy wants to be Prime Minister. Does he?
Well, I heard this on the radio this morning, and we decided to contest the leadership election. That was difficult. We got on the ballot paper, and I'm grateful to all those people that ensured that happened. We developed a very strong campaign and mobilised a lot of people. And we're not doing this without a purpose. The purpose is, yes, to change the Labour Party and change the policies, but it's also to ensure that we do approach an election with the strength and confidence to win and the strength and confidence to take it forward to the next stage. So that is the answer to that question. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you very much. Mr. President.